I'm going to answer yes. Can check this another way. So we're live. Good deal.
You are live. Mike Wiesner says, howdy to all you seekers of knowledge.
So does that make me the old guy on top of the mountain?
That's right.
I guess it does.
Yeah.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah. So we got a few just logged on right now. Egon, my friend in California, Egon and I, we discovered our birthdays are the same day years and years ago. And we've been very, very good friends since that time. Billy Beckett says, hello, Scott and Dr. Barth.
Hey, Billy.
Josh Kovac says, hi.
Glad you folks are all here.
That's right. And Billy says, hello, hello, hello. So let me share this with a few groups here.
Are we planning to have an episode for the 22nd, the Monday of Thanksgiving week? I'm good with that, by the way. I just wanted to know your schedule, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, if it's
Okay. Well, good. That gives us
that's a national holiday or anything, so
no,
right?
no, it's not. And classes are scheduled at the university, so.
Mm-hmm.
And I always find it interesting because before COVID, just before COVID, for like, I don't know, 2 years, the university got what I thought was a really an excellent brainwave. And they started classes 2 days earlier in August. And then they took the whole week off for Thanksgiving. Because as you might imagine, with students wanting to travel home, the Monday and Tuesday of Thanksgiving week are not well attended.
I can only imagine.
And I always chide my students who are young teachers after all. And I go, well, you know, that's one thing about teachers. When the school district schedules classes, we show up. And infamously, one year, I had 6 dead grandmothers on Thanksgiving Monday.
Yeah, it's amazing how many grandmas can pass on like that.
And so I had students asking, and of course the university policy is class is on, you're scheduled. There's no such thing as bereavement leave. And I said, well, give me an obituary, copy of the obituary. I'm sure it's in your local paper. And okay, Alex. So I had 6 dead grandmas and I had 6 kids from, let's just say, very, very diverse backgrounds, all gave me the same obituary, and surprised they were all from the same Greek organization. And
it's just weird sounding.
I wanted that for Halloween party.
Yeah. Well, hello, everybody. This is Scott Roberts from Explore Scientific and the Explore Alliance, and I'm here with Dr. Daniel Barth here. This is our 31st How Do You Know program, and Daniel will be talking about the origin of the moon, and I guess perhaps even the origin of some other planets, possibly.
Indeed.
So, the audio that you just heard was I guess a sonification of a astronomical image from the Hubble Space Telescope. So very bizarre sounding, sounded like something that you would hear out of a sci-fi alien movie or something. So with the face looking, the face looking like that planetary nebula face.
Yeah, right before the monster jumped out and gotcha, right? So it was a 50s movie.
Right.
So yeah, that's great stuff. And I've heard some other things like that, radio waves from Saturn and other things like that, where you get the really ethereal sounding music. Anyway, that's great. So today we're going to talk about something, I suppose you can say, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there, does it make a sound? This probably would have been the loudest impact ever. But we're really talking about the hit and run return theory. And this is brand new. It's just something that's started coming out in the last few months. And I'm sure people have been working on it, but the publications are just starting to come out. And I refer to it as the HRR theory, the hit and run return. Well, it goes back to that very, very old question: where did the moon come from? And a question certainly as old as humanity. We've wondered about our origins. Where did we come from? And you've heard the origin stories, from the turtle with the earth on its back to every religion, every culture has an origin story. And most cultures had an origin story for the moon, where the moon came from. And of course, the fun thing is, before we've talked about the idea, is it a scientific theory or is it not? Before space travel, before lunar exploration, this was really not something amenable to a scientific theory, because there was no way to test it. We talk about that as being the hallmark of a scientific theory. Can you test it? Is there an experiment you can do? And there have been times, indeed, when competing theories have existed side by side for millennia. The sun-centered and earth-centered solar system, these were coexisting theories for millennia, for thousands of years. And the origin of the moon, there was a whole bunch of them. And when we really reached the era of space travel after Robert Goddard, and we're moving up to the 50s, and we're starting to see rocketry as a serious thing, people started to take this seriously. Where did the moon come from? And there was three major theories that were out there. Basically, when Scott and I were boys, Scott, I'm sure you would have heard some of these when you were in science class, and many of our listeners maybe did. So let's acquaint you with the big three really briefly. The first one was called capture theory. The idea that the moon was a rogue asteroid or minor planet that drifted into the inner solar system and got captured by the Earth's gravitation. This one, I think, was bolstered by the discovery of the tiny, tiny moons of Mars by Asa Hall in the 1890s. And he's like, oh my gosh, these things are so tiny. And indeed they are, 9 and 26 kilometers. The fact that they were discovered from Earth is astounding. Well, if Mars could capture moons, maybe the moon was captured by Earth. And so the idea is, okay, all of these theories made predictions. And the capture theory said, well, if it was made somewhere else, the age should be different, The Earth and the Moon should be different ages, and the composition should be different. The ratio of isotopes and the mineral composition of the crust, it should be clear that they're not related. And the problem, of course, is people would say, well, the moon's awfully big, gravity's mighty weak. Could the Earth possibly capture something that large? And the moon is, just as a reminder, a quarter of our size in terms of diameter. It's 1% of our mass. And you're like, oh, it's only 1%. So think of, okay, you're a 150-pound adult, and I'm going to drop a 1.5-pound bag of rice from, say, the 4th-story window. Catch, pal. That's not an easy catch. And so the problem was, of course, in the 1960s and 50s, there's no computer system powerful enough to do a realistic simulation. They're just not fast enough. They don't have enough memory. So there was no way to test this. And we didn't know of any parent body moon, planet moon combination that was this big. Of course, later, 1978, we discovered the moon Charon. Actually, Pluto and Charon are a binary system. And Charon is about 60% of the size of Pluto and about 20% of its mass. But we didn't know that in the 1950s and early 60s. The other one, and this one was actually in my textbook as a boy, co-formation theory. Oh, you have one blob of gas and dust, and somehow, maybe because of spinning, it separates out into two bodies and it becomes the Earth and the Moon. Well, if the Earth and Moon formed from one body of gas and dust, they should be the same age. And second, they should be of virtually identical compositions. And some variations of this theory said the Earth was more massive, so it would have collected more iron and heavy metals and heavy elements than the Moon. But basically, they expected the crust to be about the same and the isotope ratios to be the same. And of course, the age would have to be virtually identical. And for our listeners out there, the age of these sorts of bodies are determined by radiological dating. We have radioisotopes, radioactive isotopes, which decay in a known rate. And you can measure the radioactive decay of certain things and get a pretty good idea of its age. And different elements give you different age spans. Carbon, radiocarbon dating is notoriously good for about 50,000 years. And then radioactive carbon disappears, but there are many isotopes that are good for billions of years. The problem with this theory, if you have one cloud, how do you get two bodies? And if you have two, why just two? Could you have 3? Could you have 12? Why did it divide itself up this way? And the supporters said, well, all of the planets around the sun probably formed from a cloud of gas, and there's 9 of those, and all the asteroids. And so, but there were people who would quibble about this. The most fun one, and this one actually had a lot of real adherents, was called the fission theory. And of course, not fusion where things stick together, but fission where they split apart. And this theory said the early Earth was one piece. It was one larger body than it is now. And somehow it spun really fast. And then a piece tore off. And when this piece tore off, it shed enough angular momentum that it was able to settle down and rotate peacefully. And there were actually advocates who claimed that proof for this fission theory was the Pacific Ocean basin. Because if you take a look at the Pacific Ocean basin, its width, its depth, and its area, and you think, well, if that was a solid piece of the crust and it ripped away, it would indeed form something reasonably close to the size of the moon, depending on how deep the hole was. And so there were advocates who were saying, oh, no, the Pacific Ocean is positive proof that in fact the moon ripped off as the Earth spun very quickly. And so this theory says, oh, the moon should be younger than the Earth, that the moon should be made of exactly what the Earth is made of, because it's just a piece of it. It's a piece of us, kind of like Adam's rib and all of that. And the problems with this theory, of course, well, gee, if the Earth spun slowly enough to condense together, how did it speed back up?
Oh,
and
yeah.
This was a real difficulty, because you may have heard, Scott, if this is a classic from physics, if you could take the Earth and stop it from rotating, just the giant hand.
I did not hear this, but okay.
Right? How much rotational kinetic energy is there, and how hot would the Earth get? And it would not just liquefy, it would vaporize. It would
Seriously?
literally vaporize. If you could stop the Earth from spinning. So
like
the amount of kinetic energy,
whoa.
yeah, the amount of rotational kinetic energy is just stupendous. The Earth is something like 1 to the 26th kilograms of mass. So a 1 followed by 26 zeros of kilograms, which is just mind-boggling. It's on the order of a trillion kilograms. And it's mind-boggling, and it's all rotating. And you know, we're rotating at the equator at about 1,000 kilometers an hour. So you're like, holy crap! How much kinetic energy does, say, a big truck or a car? You've seen people have seen these videos. Oh, watch this ship come in and misjudge and smash into the dock.
Oh yeah, destroy the entire dock.
Right, slow motion train wreck. The whole Earth, Scott. So what was able to give it enough energy to make it spin faster? I don't know if maybe some of our viewers, where is it? I think it's now in Disneyland in California, or maybe it's the California Adventure Park, but they have a huge 5-foot marble sphere, and it's in a fountain.
Okay.
Right. So the water comes up, and the water pressure keeps this ball suspended. So you can come up to it and you can push it and you can get it to rotate.
All right.
And people will come up and they'll see somebody spinning it, and they'll, oh, let's spin it a different way. And it's only 5 foot wide. It's incredibly difficult to get it moving. And you can get it moving, and then to try to stop it, it's like,
Stop it, go the other way. Yeah.
Right. This thing has a huge amount of momentum. It's a very, as a physics teacher, I was just thrilled with this thing. I'm like, oh my God, I want to bring all my students here. But you scale this up from 5 feet to 12,000 miles wide. It's like, yeah, it's gigantic. It's enormous. And so what could spin the Earth up without destroying it? And so all these theories are there. And these are the 3 major theories, and people argue back and forth. And it turns out, Scott, they are all wrong. They're all wrong. And it's not uncommon to see this in science. There are competing ideas, and somebody comes up with the brilliant idea and realizes, no, everybody before that was wrong. Copernicus did this, Kepler did this, right? Newton did this, Einstein did this. And it's kind of a truism in science that if you say, oh, no, everybody's been wrong about this for years, I have the great new idea. You either are literally the next Galileo or Copernicus, or you're an absolute crank. And that's the nicest way I can say that. And I think I've mentioned before, I get things submitted to me every now and again. Oh, here's a copy of my paper or my book on the new theory of gravitation or space travel or whatever it is. And oftentimes they're laughable. But sometimes you look at one of these things and you're like, I'm not sure. There's a theory of gravitation called MOND, which sounds like a great science fiction villain, but it stands for Modified Newtonian Dynamics. So MOND. And they're saying, oh, well, you can have this new, and it's supposed to do away with the need for dark matter. And we remember the idea of the ether. What does a light wave in? Well, it must be the ether. It must be very lightweight. It must be transparent. It must be very thin. Must be very rigid, because light, the frequency of light is very high. And Michelson and Morley came along and said, sorry, there is no ether, and you've been wrong all along. And the electromagnetic wave, it's a wave in itself. Well, all of these were wrong. The Apollo theory says, or not the Apollo theory, but the Apollo sample data says, the moon is indeed younger by almost 1 billion years, younger than Earth. So the Earth was here first. So the co-formation theory is wrong. They were not born at the same time. The isotope ratios in the lunar crust are indeed very similar to those found in the Earth. So the capture theory is wrong, because they're not different enough for that, unless every place in the solar system is the same. But again, we know that's not true anymore too. From meteorites, we know that's not true. And so the moon seemed to lack heavy metals. So co-formation and fission theory don't seem to work. So none of the theories seem to fit the data. And so about the early 1970s, 72 to 74, people started talking about the big impact theory. And this idea was originally denounced as just absolute science fiction. And the impact theory says, oh, well, there was a planet about the size of Mars. And they've named this thing Thea.
Yes.
T-E-I-A, Thea. And they said, well, this Mars-sized impactor came along and fell into the inner solar system. And bam, it hit us. And when it hit us, some of the crust materials would have splashed.
Okay.
They would have splashed into orbit. Now, we know this happens because we have meteorites on the Earth that come from the moon, that come from Mars. I have one of each of those in my collection. I have a piece of lunar breccia. I have a Martian sample. And so I'm like, that's cool. This comes from the moon. This comes from Mars. It's like a moon rock and a Mars rock I can hold and touch, which is awesome. So we know this stuff can happen, and this impact certainly would have been energetic enough. Maybe some of our viewers have seen the film When Worlds Collide. George Pal, 1955, thereabouts. And the idea is, here comes a planet bigger than Mars, and it comes along. It doesn't hit the Earth, it just passes close by. And the tidal disruptions destroy the Earth. And the new planet flies away, and people fly from this doomed planet to that planet. Isaac Newton says those planets would be tidally disrupted, but let's leave that alone. Anyway, the movie's kind of cool. George Pal, it's an awesome production, but basically you realize, yeah, even a minor hit. And of course, the rock that killed the dinosaurs, 10 kilometers wide, 6 to 10 miles, so 10 to 15 kilometers. And it caused a global catastrophe and collapsed the ecosystem, and 75% of the species on Earth were wiped out. So something like a Thea impact would have been just stunning. And I have I'm sharing a screen with everybody so you can see this. This is in the study guide, Scott, and you can see, that's a bad day.
Yeah.
That's a bad day.
Your garden is going to be kind of wiped out from that.
Yeah. The interesting thing, even before that thing hits, chunks of the Earth are literally going to be torn asunder into space from the gravitational forces. And this kind of an impact remelts the crust. The crust down to the planet,
right?
Yeah, the whole planet, planet-wide. A couple hundred kilometers deep, it remelts everything. There are no more solid structures on the Earth. It's all liquid. Yeah. And of course, it's like throwing a brick into a bathtub. The splash and the sloshing would continue for a long time. Now, this big impact theory said, well, the splash formed the moon. And some people ran theories and said, gee, you could form a moon out of the debris in a millennia or two, 1,000, 2,000 years. But certainly within 50,000 years, you could form a solid moon. Probably there would be big chunks in orbit that would continue to re-impact Earth and the moon for a long time. These give us our Maria. The moon being formed in space around the Earth's gravity affects the liquid forming moon. And guess what? The core would be pulled off center, which means the moon would quickly become tidally locked and orbit synchronously. So one side faces us all the time. And I've got my famous baseball here with the tricky lead weight inside, and it always lands heavy side down.
Right.
And so the moon, oh, if the crust is off center, oh, or the core is off center, wouldn't the crust be thinner on the near side than the far side? And in fact, it is. There should be more Maria on the near side than the far side, and in fact, there is. The isotope ratios of the Earth's crust and the lunar crust should be the same, and in fact, they are. The moon should be lacking in heavy metals because the core of Thea would sink into the Earth, and only the lightest rocks and materials would make it into orbit. And in fact, that matches the formation of the moon. And so people said, wow, this is a great theory. And then we start looking around the solar system. Mars, the northern hemisphere, 10 kilometers lower than the southern hemisphere, which argues for a gigantic impact basin. Venus spins backward, retrograde. How many times would it have to be hit so that the spin not only slows down but reverses? And basically, Scott, it's a law of angular momentum. When you have a cloud of rotating material, if you form pieces out of that cloud, they all rotate the same direction. They all orbit the same direction. And this is conservation of angular momentum. It's a basic physics thing. And so if Venus rotates backwards, it had to have been hit hard multiple times. Uranus, out there near Neptune, and it's tilted 98 degrees. Well, how did it do that? Well, obviously, it had to have a heck of a whack. And so, and Pluto and Charon, oh my gosh, it looks like there was a gigantic impact and the planet split into two. So you look around the solar system and it looks like, gosh, there's a lot of evidence for big impacts. Mercury has almost no crust. Its core is 60 to 65% of the volume of the planet. What happened to the crust? Well, if it suffers a huge impact, a lot of the crustal materials, Mercury is too small, couldn't form a moon. Those things would fall into the sun and be destroyed. And so you look around the solar system, there's a lot of evidence that the formation of a solar system is a violent event. This, everybody says, oh, accretion, two little dust grains touch and stick. They're attracted by static electricity, and maybe you get a little bigger, and it's a 1,000-mile asteroid, and little pieces gently float down because gravity is weak sauce. Yeah, but when you get some of the big pieces collide too, and they're hella violent. You know, if there's a gentle phase to planetary formation, it's in the very early stages, and it ramps up. It's kind of like a gang. As there's more attrition and the big bosses take over, stuff gets more violent. It gets kind of like a Martin Scorsese film directed by Michael Bay. So there you go. It gets to be one of these crazy violent events. And we know there was the late heavy bombardment period, right? Yes. When comets and asteroids were in, we think a lot of Earth's water came from cometary impacts. And we look at the moon, and a lot of the craters date to about 3 billion years ago, which is the late heavy bombardment, the Noachian age. And so you look at all this, and there's a tremendous amount of evidence that the early solar systems are not fun places to be. They're just not fun places to be. There are a lot of violent impacts. And on these scales, Scott, the dinosaur killer asteroid is that's spit in the ocean. That's blowing out a birthday candle compared to a tornado. This magnitude just doesn't match in any way. It would have been a non-event during the late heavy bombardment period. So this theory goes along, and for about 50 years, it seems like it's a pretty good theory. But we've talked before, science is a cage match, last man standing sort of an event.
Right.
And newer and more powerful, you can do planetary solar system formation simulations on a cell phone now that you couldn't do on a mainframe in 1970. And so we have, again, the order of computer power that we have now on a little laptop is many, many magnitudes greater than what people had access to back then. And so people have continued to look at this, and they said, well, this big impact problem, this big impact theory has its problems too. And the science is never settled.
Nope.
And so the problem is kinetic energy. So just like the old fission theory said, somehow the Earth spun faster. Well, how do you do that? Well, if you're going to have a planet the size of Mars, and this falls in from somewhere out, say even between Earth and Mars or beyond Mars towards the asteroid belt, and probably from farther out, because how does it, well, if it passes too close to Jupiter, Jupiter could certainly nudge it and make it fall in. We know these things happen. Well, if you have something falling from outside the orbit of Mars, it's a basic kinetic energy problem. And physics students do this all the time. Oh, there's a baseball and it weighs this many grams and it's falling from this many meters high. And calculate the change of kinetic energy into, or potential energy into kinetic energy. And it's something we call gravitational potential energy. Gravitational potential energy, if it's a baseball, the calculation is really simple. It's just the mass times the force of gravity times the height through which it falls, mgh. Now, if you're talking about something falling out from, say, the asteroid belt, it's a little more complex because the gravity it's the sun's gravity pulling you in, gets stronger as you fall inward, but it's not that difficult a calculation. So it's still mgh basically, but the m is, oh my God, the m is, Mars is 10% of the mass of Earth. So it's 1 times 10 to the 25th kilograms. When you multiply anything times 10 to the 25th, Scott, the answer is a hell of a lot.
Yes.
Yes.
And lots of zeros.
And lots of zeros. And so, again, the kinetic energy of something like a planet like Thea falling in, let's give it the benefit of the doubt. Let's say it's just falling in from halfway between Earth and Mars.
Okay.
Okay. It's still more than plenty enough to completely shatter the Earth and make a new asteroid belt. Just completely blast it to smithereens.
I see.
And we know these sorts of impacts happen. We trace the dinosaur killers back to a group of asteroids called Baptista. And the Baptista asteroid group, we've seen from spectroscopic studies, they're all the same. And so we realized, ooh, and they match the little tektites and things from the Yucatan Peninsula. And so we go, ooh, okay, we think it came from here, and these would have been one giant asteroid, a couple 100 kilometers wide, on the order of the size of Vesta or Ceres, and it suffered an impact and it shattered. And conservation of momentum says, yeah, most of the pieces are still traveling together, but some flew out and some flew in. And in fact, we think crater Tycho dates from just about the same time. There's simulations that said that Tycho was a twin of the dinosaur killer in Chicxulub. And so some of these things falling in, well, we know what kind of impact energy that has. And by the time something falls in, it's traveling anywhere from 35 to 45,000 kilometers an hour. So the velocity is very big, times 10 to the 25th kilograms. And it's just, holy hell.
Yeah.
The impact energy is more than enough to blast a planet to pieces. So the new folks ask, how do you have a big impact and you don't destroy everything? And it's kind of the same thing as the automotive engineers do with airbags and seatbelts. An airbag, when it inflates, it's a balloon, and it's a really fairly rigid, highly inflated balloon. And your face, you've seen the videos with the crash dummies, right? And poof, they smash into that, and a doctor will tell you there's airbag dermatitis. You get this, you smash your face into the airbag, and you have this rash that's characteristic. But the whole idea is that instead of hitting a rigid steering wheel, and in the 1950s and 60s, it was called a flailed chest, frontal impact of a sedan with a tree or a stop sign. The driver without a seatbelt would impact that rigid steering wheel, and it would crush your chest. It would break all your ribs. It would stop your heart. And so the seatbelt held you back, but just a plain seatbelt breaks sternums. It breaks ribs. And so they said, your face was still, ponging off the steering wheel. So nowadays, not only are steering wheels collapsible, but we have the airbag. And what we're doing is we're slowing down the impact speed. We're making it take longer, and we're making the velocity changes less. And basically, we have to realize too, kind of a peculiarity of these GPE-KE calculations. The path that you take doesn't matter at all. It's a classic physics problem. Here's a ball and it falls straight down for so many centimeters. Here's a ball that takes a perfect quarter circle ramp, and how fast is it moving? The one that falls and the one that goes in the curve, they're moving the same speed because they fall in the same height, and the path doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter how it gets here. It's still going to be moving the same speed depending on where it started out with. Well, their idea was, well, what if this planet is migrating in really slowly? The orbit is getting a little smaller each year. It's getting progressive nudges from Mars or Jupiter and Saturn. And so the orbit is getting a little smaller, a little smaller, a little smaller. And it's the death spiral takes 1 million, 2 million, 5 million years. So eventually when the impact occurs, it's not like an asteroid slamming into the surface of the Earth or Moon. What happens is the one body is catching up with the other, and they're moving at almost the same speed. If your car is moving at 50 and the guy in front of you on the road is moving 48 miles an hour, you know what? It's a 2 mile an hour collision. And they said, well, what if it's this really slow glancing blow? And they said, could that work? And so they said, to the back computer. Sorry, I'm sure they have a lot cooler computer than Bruce Wayne did in the 1960s. Yeah. But they went ahead and did this. They did this theory, and they said, well, if it's getting smaller, 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 eventually it's just like somebody sideswiping you on the freeway. Not that that's not a bad day, and Allstate won't be best pleased. But we look here on and we say, oh, well, and these are simulations. And they said, oh, what would happen? Well, tidal disruption, the crusts of the two planets would mix during the impact event, because the impact event might take days.
Okay.
It's not going to be a 10 minutes and doomsday. The impact is going to be slow. It's going to take a long time. And gravitation is going to be able to strip most of the crust from Thea. And Thea is going to get some of the crust of Earth back. And it's going to pass by us on its infall. And this one collision event will be horrible, but it's not over. It's like Frankenstein's monster isn't dead. Thea, after the collision, flies off into space, perhaps reduced in size. But what's happening back on the Earth, Scott, is the crust materials from Thea and Proto-Earth. Well, Proto-Earth's crust still remelts, maybe to 50 kilometers deep instead of 150. But though there's no solid structures on the Earth anymore.
So it's still a bad day.
It's still a bad day.
Yeah.
And this molten material is going to be tremendously turbulent. The whole crust of the Earth is going to be like it's in a giant smoothie blender. And it's going to churn the convection from the added kinetic energy. The boiling molten crust is going to churn and mix. And the thought is that it might be 100,000 years before Thea again hits us. And in that 100 millennia, the crust materials churn and churn and churn and churn. And now what happens? The crust materials from Earth and Thea, wherever Thea came from, they're now fully mixed. They're fully mixed together. And so the next impact, and I don't have a picture of the next impact, sorry. The next impact, when it comes some millennia later, that's the impact that forms the moon. Now, there may in fact have been a ring of debris material from this previous, the light glancing blow, the glancing blow.
Yes.
I rolled with the punch, it was nothing. So there might have been a moon, there might have been many moons, but basically when the second impact comes, one of the interesting things that happened is the first impact, Thea sheds a lot of its kinetic energy into the Earth. Its orbital speed slows so it can match the orbital speed of the Earth. And eventually the gravitational interactions pull it back in, and you have this second slow motion impact. The second impact would have made the gigantic splash. We would have had the ring of stone that would have been, say, 8 to 10,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. That second impact would have reformed the moon. And at this point, at the slow motion impact is slow enough, Thea's entire core has time to sink into the interior. And so the Earth, with a core that's 60% bigger than Mars, that's bigger than Venus, and much, much bigger than the moon, 10 or 20 times the size of the moon's core proportionately. So Earth ends up with this gigantic iron core, which gives us a lovely magnetic field. Thank you. Helps preserve life. The moon is now formed identical crustal materials because we had many millennia of very high temperature mixing, very violent mixing to thoroughly blend these materials. And okay, now you get a moon, and their computer simulations say, this gives us a moon at the right distance. It gives us a moon of the right size. It gives us a moon of the right composition. And so this hit, run, and return, and then ultimately strike again. Well, this is really fascinating. And so the group studying this, scientist named Asphog, I'm sure I'm messing his name up, my apologies. Asphog, Asphag. I know.
I'm not.
I'm sure he was. I'm sure he was never teased in school.
Yes.
He probably pronounced it differently just because.
Just because.
Just because. I know. I know. It sounds like I'm not going to go there. So they said, well, gee, if you had hit, run, and return, how would it have affected Venus? Because, of course, Venus and the Earth are very, very different.
Sure.
And they said, let's take a look at what happens with Venus. And they said, what if in falling things did this glancing blow, hit, run, return? Well, they found out when they ran the studies, the other possibility was hit, run, and fall further in, right? Fall further into the sun's gravity well.
Mercury.
But what they found was that where Earth being farther away in the sun's gravity field, hit and run is very common. with Venus closer in, the far more frequent outcome is hit and assimilate. And so for Venus, for Earth, they found out, maybe about 20% of the low speed impacts actually came back and struck the Earth. But for Venus, it's well above 50%.
Jeez.
Some studies say up to 80% of the low speed glancing blow impacts actually came back around and struck Venus. Well, if that's true, Scott, you have an answer for why does Venus not rotate prograde but retrograde? A lot more impacts. And it would seem to say, if this is true, Venus's crust should be enriched with a lot more materials that are common in the asteroid belt. Iridium is one that comes to mind, completely rare on Earth, but the layer at the KT boundary from the Chicxulub impact, iridium is 100 times enriched worldwide. And so if Venus kept getting smacked and absorbing these materials, its crust should be far enriched in things that are common in the asteroid belt, but rare here. Of course, no one's done a sample return. And so one of the things we're looking for is the possibility of a sample return. People are talking about, could we do a sample return to Venus? I'm thinking that's going to almost have to be like the asteroid Bennu, where they landed and grabbed and blasted off again, because certainly Venus is 91% the size of Earth, but its atmosphere is 100 times thicker. It's going to take just as much rocket fuel to get off of Venus as it takes to get off of the Earth.
Oh, okay.
And so I can't imagine trying to land a fueled Saturn V on Venus and stay.
At 800 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever it is.
Exactly. You're going to have to touch down and grab stuff and blast right off again. It's going to be, the design challenges are huge, but people are talking about it now. And so we don't know, but this hit, run, and return gives us a new model. The other thing is we can study now planetary disks forming around other stars. And it would be interesting to see if we could find any evidence of hit, run, return geometry going on there. So those are some interesting things.
Yes.
And we had some other fun stuff we wanted to talk about today. Wrapped up a little bit early.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to talk about a little bit is Edmund Halley's birthday.
That's
so
right.
It was 1656 on this very day. And, Edmund Halley was an incredible scientist, but he was also a huge supporter of Isaac Newton.
His protege.
There are some that say, were there no Edmund Halley, virtually no one would. Isaac Newton might have died in obscurity,
So
because he was not exactly Mr. Social. So
no, Halley actually, according to some stories, and who knows, a lot of these are apocryphal, but according to some stories, Halley played on Newton's paranoia. That he already knew that Leibniz had claimed to discover calculus. And Halley said, gosh, Ike, if you don't publish, somebody else is going to come out. And then you're going to say, but I have these books. And no one's going to believe you. So
right.
Halley basically convinced Newton to publish and did a lot of the editing and stuff on the Principia. And Newton, in return, encouraged Halley to publish his theory about the comet, which was mostly based on historical research, discovering this comet every 76 years in the historical record back to the time of the Normans. And of course, I forget the Bayeux Tapestry, right?
Yep.
That's Halley's comet.
That's right.
Woven into it during the Norman Conquest.
King Harold and all of that.
King Harold and the arrow in the eyeball. Yeah, don't do that, kids. Halley's birthday. and it's really stunning. And we were talking before the show about Mark Twain, who was born
Right.
when Halley's
Bookends,
Comet
right? The bookends of
passed
his
by.
life were the apparitions of Halley's Comet.
And yes, and he predicted that he would die when Halley's
Yeah.
Comet
I wonder,
came back again.
do you
Kind of
think that's
creepy, and in fact, it came true. And of course, in his day, 76 was a very long life for a fellow. The average lifespan was far less than it is today during Twain's time.
sure? That's right.
So, Halley, a great figure in astronomy history, and happy birthday, Edmund, wherever you are. So yeah, I got to see Halley's Comet in, what was it, 86, I think?
1985 is when
85, when it came
some
back.
astronomers, even amateur astronomers, were starting to see its inbound. Okay, which was
Right.
a lot of excitement.
Right.
There was a ProAm project headed up by my friend, probably your friend too, Daniel, which was Dr. Stephen Edberg from the Jet Propulsion
Oh, yes.
Laboratory. And as an amateur astronomer, you could make visual inspections of Halley's Comet. He taught us how to defocus a candidate or a reference star to the same diameter that you would see of the head of the coma of Halley's Comet, and that's the way you would predict the brightness estimate, okay, and how to measure the length of the tail and the orientation of the tail and any other features that you might see, like an anti-tail or those kinds of things. So we were writing down all these observations. At the time, I had a 13-inch Coulter Newtonian telescope and loved it, and just it was very thrilling to take part in that and send in my observations, and knowing that somewhere out there on a science paper is my name along with thousands of other names. But it was a very successful ProAm project.
It was.
And I think you remember too, Daniel, the giant increase in interest in astronomy during this time.
Oh, yes. I was out, and that was one of the things that got me bootstrapped from an astronomy club to an astronomy class. I was teaching high school at the time, and we had an 8-inch Celestron, and it was a glorious machine. I'd never owned anything bigger than a 60-millimeter refractor, and so for me, this was oh my gosh, Mount Wilson, here I am. And I took that out on the football field and took my students out, and it was just, we had lots of people come out to look through the telescope and see Halley's Comet, and
oh my goodness, yes,
it bootstrapped my astronomy teaching career. Absolutely, it did. So thank you to Halley's Comet. And
that's right.
And I'm not going to be around when it comes back. Neither are you. But the next generation, my students who are students now, could be. They take care of themselves. They should be around when Halley comes back. Although I understand the next apparition is not going to be really great for people on Earth.
And why is that? Or do you know?
It has to do with the geometry of where it passes, the sun. And we're just fairly far from it. And so the next apparition, if I remember right, is not going to be a very nice one. But there's always a few new comets a year. So for those of you that enjoy them, we remember Comet Yakutake and Comet West, and of course Hale-Bopp. And I was the telescope salesman at the time of Hale-Bopp. And
that was also a very exciting time.
Yes, it was very exciting, and we sold the telescope to the Heaven's Gate people. Yes, we did, and because we had a big Meade 12-inch go-to system, the LX200, and at that time a 12-inch LX200 sold for like $16,000. It was hugely expensive.
Wow.
And people would come in and say, what's the best telescope to see the comet? And we would say, this one right here. Well, how much is it? Well, it's $16,000. But we have these very nice telescopes for between $200 and $500 that'll let you see the comet. We sold lots of $200 to $500 telescopes.
Right.
And then one day a guy comes in and he says, well, how much? And we tell him, and he says, tell me more. And he took out a stack of cash. And we called the main office, and they told us, have him go and get a money order. We're not accepting what might be counterfeit cash for a very expensive piece of equipment. And a few days later, yes, we know what happened with Heaven's Gate. It was a tragedy.
Jeez.
And but yeah, so you see all kinds in the telescope business. When comets were visible, I would have people come in and is it a spaceship? Are there aliens? If I look at the comet,
amateur
I
astronomers
see a spaceship, and we had people come in.
Yeah.
I remember I had one fellow come in. It might have been Comet Yakutaki. And he came in and he says, oh, I see you sell microscopes. I'm like, yes, we do. Well, can I look at something under the microscope? I said, oh, no biological specimens, please. God knows what he's going to do.
Oh, you've told me the story before. Okay.
Have we? Yeah. Okay. So the guy looked and he's like, no, I'm sure this is a UFO. And no, indeed, it was not. But comets and big astronomical events boost our business and influence people to take up astronomy. And of course, the pandemic did the same thing. We're stuck home, and what can we do in the backyard?
Look up at the sky. I think that what's different about the pandemic of people looking up at the sky versus just a one-off kind of astronomical event is that this was a long, sustained deal. You know, people were under lockdown in a lot of parts of the world, and you know, you might be allowed to go to your backyard and look up. You know, and so I think that the psychological need to reconnect with nature was very, very strong.
Indeed.
And you know, so and you know, seeing the stars overhead, if you lived in someplace a little darker, so you could start to see the Milky Way, really had huge benefits. You know, so
cometary events really last longer than a month or two. They're rarely at their best for more than a month.
Right. That's right. The Mars opposition, you know, it's just a short window, you know, that kind of thing as well. But to start to understand the sky in all of its glory over the period of a year or a couple of years is really amazing. And I really do think that that will foster a lot of people to take up astronomy as a lifelong endeavor.
Indeed. We did, I and my astronomy education students, we did a planetarium event at Reagan Elementary School up in Rogers, Arkansas, just this last Friday. And the interest was tremendous. And we had people lining up until it was time to go home. And then they were having, they had a big outdoor movie. They were doing a STEM night, and then they were having a movie for everybody and food and things like that. And when we were leaving, I had a parent come up to me and say, "Ooh, are you the astronomer?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, I've heard," and she was asking me about planets, and I was able to point out Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus for her. And she was like, "Wow, can you see them with a telescope?" I'm like, "Certainly. Any small telescope will really show you wonderful things." And it hasn't slacked. It hasn't slacked. It really hasn't.
No,
I get a lot of interest on various Facebook groups and social media groups, and it hasn't slackened at all.
That's wonderful. I think it's great.
So coming up next week, we're going to kind of parlay the hit, run, and return. We're going to study gravity a little bit. We're going to show people, we're going to go back to a hands-on activity, something that we do. And we're going to take a look at a hands-on activity. We're going to study gravity sort of the way Galileo did, with balls and ramps. And we're going to take a look at something that was invented by an American high school physics teacher, John Packard, back in about 1906, called the Packard ramp or the Packard apparatus. And we're going to show you something you can do at home. And it doesn't require anything much And if folks are interested, a piece of wood or cardboard to use for a ramp, a big piece of construction paper, some markers. You need you need a marble and some sandpaper. We're going to sand the surface of the marble, make it a little dull finish, and some food coloring or ink of any kind. And we're going to show you how you can do a number of things, including proving that the acceleration of gravity is always the same. Something that I would get arguments with from, well, no, it's not. If it's heavier, it has to fall faster. Sorry, Aristotle, Galileo proved you wrong, 400. But students still argue this. No, if it's heavier, it must fall faster. And we're able to show here that an acceleration of gravity is always the same, and we can do it at home. And incidentally, this is a great introduction to derivative calculus. And yes, I've done it with fourth grade students. So everybody attend and show up. And I'll try to have the handout early so everyone can see what they need if they want to follow it along at home. Or of course, they can look at the video later on Facebook or YouTube and try it yourself. It's a great, if you have kids who are looking for a science fair project, bada bing, this one's great. And always gives wonderful results. It's really cool. So we'll enjoy that next week.
Very awesome. I decided to try to cheat and just because I haven't seen, or I don't think I've seen a Packard ramp before. So I just type in Packard ramp under Google Images. And what I get are Packard automobiles going up a ramp. So
I see.
Really
well,
interested.
Let me see if I can help you here, Scott. Let me see if I can help you here. And I'll see if I can find it because I just did a nice video for this. And I'll see if I can, let's go to Packard and search for that. See if we can find it. Here we go. Here we go. Packard video. How long is this? 7 seconds. All right. I've got a couple of them. I'm going to share the screen. They're very, very short, just a few seconds long. And so here we go. Let's take a look at the first one together. Physics guarantees a perfect result no matter what you do.
We're hearing it, but not seeing it.
Did you see that one?
No.
No. Okay. Let me move it over to the other screen. Let's try it again. Here we go.
Here we go. Here we go.
Here we go. Physics guarantees a perfect result no matter what you do. So you can see we've got the ramp there and the marble, and it's got some food coloring on it.
Yes.
And when it rolls down,
physics guarantees a perfect result.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Barth. And so you get this very nice parabola. And
nice.
Let's take a look at the other one. And whoops. Oh, bother. Let's search for Packard. Here it comes. Bother. Search for. Here it comes. Okay, here's the second video. So I'll play that again and I'll freeze it. So you see what's happening there, Scott? Remember, what goes up must come down?
Right.
And we can prove with this that not only is that true, but we can prove that it goes up just as fast as it comes down, and the time up is the same as the time down, and lots of fun things. And of course, the best part is my young educators squealing in delight. Yay! So I put that on social media. And everyone was delighted with that. So that's
Very
what we're
cool.
going to do next week, folks. We'll have this delightful, fun activity, and you're all encouraged to squeal and yell and cheer as we do this. So there we go. So that's it, folks. We'll see you next week.
Well, thank you very much. Coming up next is just a short video of Edmund Halley's prediction of an eclipse, okay, which is pretty interesting.
Excellent.
Right? And remember, although maybe you weren't even, perhaps not even born in the 80s to see Halley's Comet, you can always see some parts of it every year in the Orionid meteor shower.
That's right.
So that's in October usually, and so that's something you want to check out.
There we
But
go.
until that time, we'll see you tomorrow. We do have the 72nd Global Star Party, which is entitled, the theme of it is Inspiration of Sagan, because tomorrow is Carl Sagan's birthday. So we're going to celebrate it as well. And who of us out there have not been somehow touched and inspired by Carl Sagan? So,
Indeed.
all right. So take care and keep looking up, guys, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
At Harvard University, locked in the Houghton Library's special collection, is a rare document. It showed for the first time that the path of totality could be accurately predicted.
In 1715, the British astronomer Edmund Halley became the first person to correctly predict a total solar eclipse by using the mathematics of his good friend Isaac Newton to calculate the orbit of the moon around the Earth, and therefore where its shadow would fall across the countryside.
In April of 1715, Halley published this map, forecasting that in 2 weeks' time, an eclipse would pass over London. Halley had studied records of past eclipses and rediscovered the Saros cycle, lost since ancient times. This told him an eclipse was due. He then used new, accurate observations of the moon's orbit to calculate its path. Among the things he had to take into account was the unusual orbit of the moon, which is tilted by 5 degrees. So most of the time, the moon's shadow misses our planet, which makes eclipses rare. He also had to factor in the gravitational effect of the Earth and the Sun, which subtly alters the moon's position. By luck, Newton's new theory of gravity gave him just the tool he needed to accurately calculate the path of the eclipse across England.
From comparing the maps that Edmund Halley made of the 1715 eclipse, both before and after, based on the observations by the public, we find that he was actually within about 20 miles, amazingly precise.
And Halley's estimate of the time of the eclipse was off by just 4 minutes.
Why do we chase this thing? Jumping from one continent to the next, just to bathe for a moment in the absence of light? Who are we? What are we searching for?
T.S. Eliot wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time."
One of the qualities of seeing an eclipse is it makes you understand that every given thing is in a particular patterned relation with every other thing.
It gives me a sense of scale, gives me a sense of where I fit into the universe.
It is art, is poetry, it's this kind of experience of going and seeing totality in which what feels merely metaphorical is suddenly experiential encounter.
Immediately afterwards, you have that overwhelming desire to see another one. That's the moment an eclipse chaser is born.
These are folks who are running all over the world for this event that lasts all of 2 or 3 minutes. Who are these people?
It's unique each time. And therefore that freshness, even if we've seen it over and over again, oh my gosh, it has the potential to re-inspire us.
A total eclipse of the sun doesn't just unfold in the heavens. It transforms the minds and hearts of those who experience it firsthand. The same is true of journeys to the most remote regions of our planet. Whether we're standing on a mountain peak or in a stark polar landscape, we can't help but reflect on our place within the larger scheme of things.